Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Steinberg Halion 7 tutorial series. Today we're going to have a look at the step modulator. This is one of the pages in the zone section. And the best way to think about the step modulator's job is that it is to modulation what the flex phraser is to pitched notes. The step modulator is essentially a 32-step sequencer that we can define modulation offsets to and then assign those offsets to any modulation destination in the system. I'll show you a few examples today of different kinds of destinations that we can map to. Hope you're enjoying the series so far. If you are, check out the Patreon and channel member links below. Awesome way to help support my channel. For the first demonstration today, I'm going to load up a mono synth sound. I'm going to go into the media bay and I'm going to load a sound called Fast Pulse Saw, and it sounds like this. Now at the moment, and by default, the step modulator is set to 16 steps. As you can see, we can go all the way up to 32. 16 is completely fine to start off with. However many steps we specify, you're going to get this many selectable zones in the main viewer. I can now click with my mouse and basically define really easily any amount of modulation that I want. Each one of these columns represents an amount of modulation that's going to be sent to a destination. Well, let's choose filter cutoff because that's pretty classic stuff. And we'll have a look at what kind of filter we've got. So here's our tube drive filter on the sound that I've loaded. I'm going to pull the basic cutoff down to about 100 Hertz. And I'll dial in an amount of cutoff. Let's see, we'll start off with about 60. And now I'll hold down a single note. So as I hold that note down in the background, as you can see, here it is in the virtual keyboard, the step sequencer is cycling through this modulation bang, this sequence of modulation offsets. Every time it reaches a new step, it's going to apply that much offset, positive or negative, to whatever it's mapped to. So it's incredibly easy to define instantly dynamic, really cool effects. We have various sync modes to play with. At the moment, we're set to tempo plus beat, which means I'm basically locked in to my host DAW tempo. As you can see, I'm around about 93 at the moment. But as I increase or decrease the BPM, that's going to have an effect on the modulation. But I'm also tied in to the beat of the song. So if the song was playing in the background, there is no song here. But I've basically just got the Cubase running in the background. All of these modulation offsets are always going to be synced. Doesn't matter when I press the note. To the host DAW. The other timing option available to me is tempo plus retrig. When we select retrig, we get new sub options. Do we want it to trigger off every note that's played? Just the first note that's played in any, for instance, chord-based arpeggio kind of idea. So if we leave it on each note, for instance, now we've got nothing to do with the song, so I don't need to get the song running again. The sequence, the modulation step sequencer, restarts. I'm holding 4 notes down simultaneously there, as you can see on the virtual keyboard, or just the first note. Step sequencer does its own thing. The moment one note is pressed, it begins cycling, and then I can add more notes into the chord-based arpeggio. Then we've got some pretty straightforward timing-based options. If I set this to 32, it's going to run twice as fast. I can also set it to run in triplets if I want by pressing the little 3 button. Now, one of the lovely things about the step modulator is the slope feature. So rather than having all of these columns basically ons and offs, we can actually morph or gradiate in between them. In order for this to have any effect, I need to set the slope to something other than none. So let's have slope on rising edges. And then as I dial in the slope amount, it's really pretty obvious what's happening. Falling edges. Or both. Then we have a large bank of preset sequence shapes that we can apply. So let's go into the common section and we'll choose 16 to 32. So named because you can see we've got two banks of modulation effect, one pattern dominating for the first 16 steps and a second for the second 16 steps. And that's going to give us this. It's so easy to make it sound really good. Quite like that falling one actually. Then we've got the ability to individually edit each one of these steps, and obviously because this is Halion we have 47 million options to go from. If we individually click in any column, then you're going to set the height of that column. Ooh, just moved over there. And don't forget this slope amount always applies to every one of the steps in the sequence. If I control click on a column, then I set it to 0. If I shift control click, I set all the columns to 0. If I press the Alt button, I'm going to create a ramp. Then you've always got one step currently selected. You can see it's the highlighted step here. If I press left or right on my keyboard, I'm going to select which column is going to be edited, and then I can press up and down with the arrow keys, press down. It's going to adjust it in large increments. If I press the shift key and press down, as you can see it's going down in very small increments now. I can reverse the entire pattern by clicking the reverse button, and I can shift it forwards or backwards according to the step sequence, and this will basically wrap around on itself so the modulation amounts don't fall off the end. You can reset it however you want. For the next demonstration, we're going to use a couple of presets from the Hypnotic Dance extension pack. I'm going to use PWM Trans ARP 1 and 2 to demonstrate a feature of the step modulator that you need to be quite careful of. I'm actually going to start with ARP 2. First things first, this is modulation of pan, so we've got an interesting kind of new effect to play with. Let's have a listen to the sound before we start. I'll play a C major chord. Quite clearly, hard panning left and right. Watch this little yellow dot. So that's tracking the current state of the step modulator's modulation amount, positive and negative, that's being sent into the pan setting. Everything's working perfectly happily. Now we have a flex phraser doing its thing in the background, playing notes. But there's a very important setting in the flex phraser that's allowing the step modulator to work properly. Let's have a look at it. Okay, take a look at gate scale, greater than 100. Jump back over to the step modulator, play that C major again. Perfectly well behaved. Now we go into the flex phraser and click on gate scale and set it to 100. Now if we have a look at the step modulator, every one of those notes is now independent. In other words, once one note has stopped, this is an arpeggiated sequence, don't forget. It's taking this C major chord and it's playing those notes in consecutive manner rather than concurrent. In other words, first note is triggering all the time. Every single time the next signal from the arpeggiator comes in, then the sequence is refiring. If we extend the gate scale again back to the point where all of those notes are blurring into each other, and play my C major, sequence is once again up and running. Notice there's that little blip at the beginning. Can I make it happen again? Don't seem to be able to. There seemed to be one very short note at the beginning before the sequence got up and running. But now it's playing properly. If we now jump over to ARP 1, Trans ARP 1, in this particular flex phrase sound, the gate scale is set to 100. So if we dial in some modulation amount, I actually did that a bit too quick. Let's have a quick mention about this. Very often you'll see presets in Halion with modulation depth of the step modulator set to 0. So it's been dialed in, you know, there has been a pattern defined here, but the depth is set to 0. So if you're wanting to get to grips with how the step modulator works, a nice thing to do is to browse through the various presets. Basically just double click on each of them in turn. So you can double click on all of these presets, have a look at it, think, oh, that looks interesting, let's see what that sounds like. Just bear in mind that, as you can see, modulation depth is very often set to 0. Another thing to look out for is, here we go, there's one. So we've got, in this case, must have multiple layers. Some of them are using the step modulator, some of them aren't. So in that case, obviously, you'll need to drill into the program to see which ones are using the step modulator, set the depth accordingly. Anyway, back to the example we were talking about, ARP1. Modulation depth set to 0, so let's turn it up, press my C major chord. So we must have a gate scale set here such that each one of those first note commands is firing. Let's go over into the flex phraser and prove that. Sure enough, here's the gate scale. Turn gate scale up to make each one of those notes a little bit longer. We had that little blip at the beginning again. That must be the end of the sequence with perhaps a note that's shorter than the others. And now the sequence is firing perfectly happily. So just bear in mind this complex relationship between you must have notes merged together in order for your retrigger mode to do the job that you want it to do. If you want to take that entire situation out of the equation and just have the step sequencer cycle completely freely in the background, absolutely no problem. Set everything to off. It'll just pan perfectly merrily, regardless of what the gate scale is set to. Now it looks like it's kind of randomly jittering all over the place. What's actually happening, if I press a note, you can see that the step sequencer is running silently in the background. There's constant spinning in the background, and when I press a note, I'm just jumping on wherever it happens to be at the point, and it's visually giving the appearance that it's generating a random sequence. It isn't. Let's have a look at another example. This time I'm going to use the step sequencer to act as a pseudo tremolo device. This time I'm going to go into the HAL factory library and I'm going to search for elliptic function. So as you can see, red stuff in the step modulator, a multi-layer program where we have different step modulator settings between the various layers. Let's just listen to the sound first. All I need to do is press a single note for this one. So I'm just holding a C down here. Now the ARP layer is the one that's generating the sequence. We don't actually need that for the purpose of the demo because if we have a look at the ARP layer modulator, it's not doing anything. Let's mute it or solo the pad instead. This is the one that we're interested in. So we have a largely silent step modulator. For the majority of the 32 steps, it's not doing any work. And then right at the end, it's mapping into volume in the amplifier section. It's the master level of the amplifier that's being modulated here. In other words, we're getting partial complex tremolo. Let's slow it right down. It's a really cool effect. And then we bring the sequence back in over the top. Let's have a play with the different slope modes. This is a really nice example of the step modulator not having to do work all of the time. What have we got here? 8 steps at the end of a 32 step sequence. So for 3/4 of the time, the step modulator is completely silent. When it kicks in, it's doing a really interesting thing at the end of the phrase. For the last demonstration today, I'm going to go back to the fast pulse saw sound that we had at the beginning. So that's HS Factory, Fat Pulse Saw. What did I say? Fast? No. Fat Pulse. There we go. This time I'm going to demonstrate the use of the step modulator as a pitch control. Now obviously the flex phraser is a very powerful pitch controlled arpeggiator / sequencer, so you might wonder why you would ever want to use the step modulator. Well, the sloping feature of the step modulator is pretty unique, and so we can use that to do some pitch control work. Now, if you want to use the step modulator as a pitch controller, there are some specific rules that you need to adhere to. I'll show you what they are. Let's first of all add modulation to pitch. Now, the pitch modulator in Halion is calibrated plus or minus 60, and this corresponds to semitone-based offsets. So if I set the modulation depth to 12, that means at maximum extent on the step modulator, if it's doing as much work as it possibly can, it's going to raise the pitch by 12 semitones. Before we go any further, let's just do that. I'm just going to draw in some very simple modulation, press a key. Now, all of those values are essentially random. Basically applied an amount of modulation somewhere between none and 1 octave to each one of those 16 steps. But we have a value on the left-hand side that we haven't looked at yet, which is snap. If I engage snap, I'm going to Control Shift to get rid of all that stuff. And this time you might just be able to see there's like 24 little zones in the background representing individual quantized step values that I can apply modulation values to. So if I choose some 7s and 5s and -5s, which is basically +7, I'm essentially dialing in perfect 4ths and perfect 5ths and nothing else. Now when I press the key, let's get a bit fruity. So the step modulator is capable of being gradiated into 12 equal chunks. The overall maximum modulation that we can apply is 12 semitones or 1 octave. So when we engage snap and we set a modulation depth of exactly 12, then we essentially get the ability to generate our own sequences. Now bear in mind, 12 is a very specific value, and that's the only number that's really going to work properly. If, for instance, I set modulation depth to 24, what I've basically done now is set a maximum span of 2 octaves. There's a problem though. Snap won't really work properly anymore. All it's going to do is give you 2 semitones, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and so on and so on. If I want to generate a perfect fifth, which is 7 semitones away from my root, I can't do it using the step modulator. I'd need to work out according to I've got 2 octaves to play with, what are the 12 offsets that I want to assign, and then I'd have to work out what those individual level controls were very specifically. It's doable, it is possible to do it. So you could, for instance, set the modulator all the way down to 2, set a level of, I don't know, what value do I have to add to these individual bars to get them to output exactly a G. So if I slow it down as slow as I possibly can. So there you go, the answer's 29. That's 2 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back. That's as close as I can get. That's not really what it's for. Set your modulation depth to 12 and it'll work perfectly happily over a single octave. And that's the step modulator done. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.